So, on January 22nd, 2026, at Davos, Switzerland, in the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, President Trump succeeded in chartering his Board of Peace, which apparently was originally proposed in September. It was ratified by the UN, but the document that has emerged as the charter as adopted, I'm not sure accurately reflects what the UN thought the body was going to be. So, the purpose of this episode is to discuss briefly the Charter and the enumerated powers therein, establishing Trump's Board of Peace. Board of Peace. I think these choice of words are interesting, not only because it allows him to be Chairman Trump, it also obviously is a sort of corporatist projection onto the world map, which I think has undertones of global development rather than peace. In other words, a means of appealing transactionally to the self-interest of various parties that may be in conflict, with the hopes of resolving said conflict by international development, let's say, on the ground. But Trump's Board of Peace also suggests that, he's bored of peace. He is. He's downright fed up with it. So initially, Trump invited about 60 countries to be members of this Board of Peace. The idea is an international body comprising member states represented by the head of state for each member or their duly appointed designee as approved by the chairman. The chairman, of course, is Donald Trump. He is no longer Comrade Trump. There's been a lot of jokes going around on social media about Comrade Trump, compromat number one, which I think is probably reference to the Epstein files and the assertion that if Jeffrey Epstein is indeed a Mossad agent, or was indeed a Mossad agent, that perhaps Trump himself is compromised, and that, of course, Melania, who was introduced to him by Epstein, is his handler for the GRU. That's kind of a funny one. But anyway, Comrade Trump, compromat number one, will be, for the rest of his life, Chairman Trump, which I think is rather interesting. So the board basically is, in a sense, I wouldn't say it's a competing version or an alternative forum to the United Nations. And I'll just read what its mission statement ultimately is out of Chapter 1, its purposes and functions. The Board of Peace is an international organization that seeks to promote stability, restore dependable and lawful governance, and secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict. The Board of Peace shall undertake such peace-building functions in accordance with international law as may be approved in accordance with this charter, including the development and dissemination of best practices capable of being applied by all nations and communities seeking peace. Essentially, it's a pretty broad mandate. Peace building is not really well defined in the charter. And of course, the chairman, who is Trump, has a lot of powers in determining kind of what role the Board of Peace will play, what subcommittees and subsidiaries that it ultimately sets up. It has the right to own property, has the right to enter contract. It's an international personality. It's subject only to the laws that it agrees with the member states wherein it chooses to operate or is accepted to operate. And the chairman basically has just like almost ultimate power. It's amusing to me because it says, for example, in here that the decisions of the board will be made by majority vote, comma, subject to approval by the chairman. In other words, there is no vote, really. Trump has almost sole veto power over any action the board may choose to take. So it also sets up an executive board. The executive board meets quite frequently for the first 3 months, every 2 weeks, so biweekly it's meeting, and then it meets monthly. And the executive board is kind of like the administrative executive arm, of course, of the board. It reports quarterly to the board itself, and its decisions are essentially implemented by a majority vote of the members present and voting, including the chief executive in this case, who's appointed by Trump. Solely, exclusively appointed by Trump, although a majority of the board does have to approve the appointment, but he gets to nominate the chairman. And basically, the decisions the executive committee makes are implemented immediately, subject to a veto by the chairman at any time thereafter. So when the executive committee kind of meets, it can make its decisions, and those are implemented right away unless Trump decides at any point to veto the decision. So what other powers does the chairman of this body have? And remember that Trump is the inaugural chairman of this body, which he basically designed and implemented. He's chairman for life. So no matter what happens with the suspected third term and his issues at home, he will forever be in charge of this international body that he's created, wherein members are asked to pay $1 billion to remain on as members of the board. Basically, initial membership is a 3-year term, and in order to stay on the board, you have to pay $1 billion, which goes into an account that's controlled by Trump. And of course, he has the sole discretion to renew that membership as well, which I think is also quite interesting. So after 3 years, if the board is to remain, and if you want to remain on the board, then basically you pay $1 billion. So Trump for life will be the chairman of this board. Now, how does a new chairman get voted in? Well, he's not voted in. The new chairman can only be instated at the voluntary resignation of the current chairman, or incapacity. The new chairman is essentially the successor chairman that the current chairman at all times must designate. So already the chairman Trump, has a successor that he has named. And if for some reason, and of course he can change that name probably at any time, but if at some reason he is found to lack capacity to be the chairman, then he can be removed by unanimous vote of the executive committee of the board. The chairman can only be replaced by voluntary resignation or as a result of incapacity as determined by unanimous vote of the executive board, at which time the chairman's designated successor shall immediately assume the position of the chairman and all associated duties and authorities of the chairman. So if he is removed by a unanimous vote of the executive committee or board, the executive board, then his successor immediately comes into power, and he chooses his successor. There is no sort of vote on the successor, which I think is also a little bit remarkable. So what other powers does the chairman have? Well, he has a lot of powers. He has the power to renew the membership of the member states. He has the power to remove members, subject to a 2/3 majority vote veto of the members. He can accept the resignation of the members. He has the power to convene the meetings. He approves the agenda. So they can make an agenda, they can submit it to the executive board. The executive board can forward it, but if he doesn't like it, it doesn't go through. He can change it. This is my favorite part. I already said this, but it warrants repeating. Decisions shall be made by a majority of the member states present and voting, subject to the approval of the chairman, who may also cast a vote in his capacity as chairman in the event of a tie. So the last part is not unusual for the presiding officer to have a vote to break a tie, but it is rather unusual to have him have sort of unconditional veto power over any decision made by the board. I'm not sure how else you would interpret subject to the approval of the chairman. So he approves the representatives that, meet at the board in the event that a head of state elects to have a designee represent the member instead of the head of state, subject to Trump's approval. He can invite relevant regional economic integration organizations, whatever that means. Relevant regional economic integration organizations to participate in the proceedings of the Board of Peace under such terms and conditions as he deems appropriate. So he might basically bring in some, Kurdish warlord perhaps, or a Taliban member in some area, bring him into negotiation. This could be good, I guess. Try to figure out terms of peace, but also, for development, on the ground, local areas. I think what seems to me peace building, the way that it's set forth in the mission of this charter, peace building kind of carries an inference of construction and real estate. That's kind of what's going on in Gaza. And it's almost like appealing transactionally to the self-interest of the members and, I guess, the regional economic integration organizations, appealing to their self-interest and basically saying, look, we can all get rich. Let's stop war. War isn't profitable. I mean, it is for a while and it is for some, but peace can be much more profitable. So let's find out ways that we can all benefit from ending whatever the conflict may be. So I already mentioned that he has the ability to designate his successor. He has the exclusive authority to create, modify, or dissolve subsidiary entities as necessary or appropriate to fulfill the Board of Peace mission. So if they need to form, I don't know, a construction subsidiary, let's say, or an NGO somewhere, he has the exclusive authority to form and dissolve that organization, essentially at his will. I think I mentioned he can establish subcommittees as necessary, and he can mandate the structure and governance rules for those subcommittees. So he could set up a Gaza subcommittee. He could set up a, I don't know, London subcommittee, and he could devise those rules as he sees fit. I think I already spoke about the executive board. This also, I think, is interesting. If there's disagreements among the board members, they're basically meant to resolve them with mind to the cooperative, intent of the charter, right? It's basically what it says. But when it comes to interpreting the meaning of the charter, the chairman has the final authority. The chairman is the final authority regarding the meaning, interpretation, and application of the charter. And finally, he is able to dissolve at such time as he considers appropriate, and he needs to renew the Board of Peace in every odd-numbered year by November 21st of that year. If he fails to renew the Board of Peace, it's dissolved. I guess it sucks to be you if you paid the $1 billion to be in it. But he's also authorized to adopt resolutions or other directives to implement the board's mission. So ordinarily, when you set forth a resolution, it's usually by a majority of members present and voting, right? Depending on what the resolution is. And it comes kind of like a bylaw, like a policy statement, whatever. It's kind of supposed to be a type of binding rule that the body would follow. And in this case, he's authorized to just adopt resolutions. So I don't know if that's supposed to be by members present and voting or how that works. It just says he's authorized to adopt them, resolutions and other directives, as he seems necessary to implement the board's mission. So it seems to me that Chairman Trump has set up a board for international development that will basically push peace by appealing to not just members, but also these integrated economic regional units or whatever they may be that he sees fit to bring into the board for whatever specific purpose under whatever subcommittee umbrella he happens to devise, and essentially forge economic interests for mutual enrichment. That's kind of what it seems like. There are other questions that are unanswered, like the $1 billion. Let's say we pay $1 billion, and I'm Argentina. I just got 40 billion from the United States, right? I think Trump gave me that check for 40 billion. I'm Argentina. I'm like, okay, I'll give him $1 billion. I'll give him. Now I got 39 billion from the American taxpayer. Now I have a life membership, perpetual membership on this Board of Peace. So that money, it's not really clear where it goes. It's not really clear if it's administered by the board, because the board has a provision for administering the funds that are raised by the members. It basically says the members will raise the money and the executive board will determine how to spend it and make sure it's all legal and transparent and above board. But that clause doesn't specifically address the $1 billion payments that come in to be a sort of perpetual member. Who are the members of the initial executive board that he has appointed? The following people currently. Nikolay Mladenov is a representative for Gaza. He was appointed by the U.S. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State. Steve Witkoff is the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East and no stranger to doing business in Russia. Jared Kushner, of course, is Donald Trump's son-in-law with lots of interests and I would argue conflicted transactions surrounding his negotiations in the Middle East, certainly with his new Gaza plan, right, which apparently he's been working on for his master plan for more than 2 years, so arguably around or even before the October 7th attack. Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, somewhat disgraced for his role in Iraq and Afghanistan, bringing the UK in, which of course Trump just denigrated, by the way. Apparently the Brits were not near the front line, despite the 450, whatever it was, people that died, gave their lives in that conflict defending the United States. Mark Rowan, CEO of Apollo Global Management. So money people. Ajay Banga is the president of the World Bank. More money people. Robert Gabriel Jr. is an American political advisor, and I don't actually know who that is. So, and then there's other boards that they're going to, form out of this. So, interesting times. What do we think will happen here? Personally, I don't really see this thing getting legs. I think that it will be around for a few years. It's 2026 right now, so November 21st of 27. If Trump doesn't renew it as the chairman, or his successor, if he is voted to have incapacity, it will basically just be dissolved automatically. Of course, the chairman can dissolve it at will too, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's possible that it could become kind of like an alternative forum to the United Nations. To me, it seems more like an international development company rather than an actual board of peace. As I said before, it seems like it is setting up a means to, I wouldn't say profiteer from conflict, but let's say appeal to the self-interest transactionally to try to resolve conflict with profit in mind, something like that. I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be taken seriously. The powers that are in it, the 20 countries that have accepted their invitations, are not exactly the who's who of global commerce. Of course, he does have a lot of the Middle East. So that is significant. The companies that have accepted thus far are Argentina, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Bulgaria, Hungary, Indonesia, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Mongolia, Morocco, Pakistan, Paraguay, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, obviously the US, and Uzbekistan. So, there are some interesting sovereign wealth funds included. Then apparently these said they will accept, but they didn't accept by the time that the charter was being enacted there yesterday. Albania, Belarus, Egypt, Israel. Of course, we now know that Netanyahu allegedly will have a senior role on the board. Kuwait, another sovereign wealth fund that is significant in Vietnam. A bunch obviously haven't responded. I believe Russia has responded. I don't know if the posts I saw on X were current, but certainly X seems to break the news before any other platform in this day and age. If you're not on X, you're missing out on the news as it breaks. But my understanding is Putin turned him down because Gaza wasn't properly represented. Palestine was not properly represented on the board. So that's my understanding, is that Russia turned him down, which I think is interesting. We live in weird times where Vladimir Putin appears to be one of the most reasonable world leaders. How did that happen? And then the following states declined. And I think this is significant. Obviously, Europe is in here, but in a sense, you could argue that the Board of Peace, as an alternative jurisdiction to the UN, is deliberately to sequester power from the European Union and sort of claw back American influence over the superstructure, the bureaucracy that was set up under Bretton Woods and, the League of Nations and all that stuff following World War II. But these are the nations that have declined the invitation: France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Norway, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. That is of today, close of business, Friday, January 23rd. Well, interesting times, never seems to end. I'm going to end with a short phrase that I like to say. The great statesman of ancient Rome, Cato, used to end every speech he gave in the Senate with one simple line. And this is kind of an abbreviated version that has become sort of suggestive and common. But the idea being, of course, that Carthage was a ever-present threat to Rome. And Cato, in his desire to get Rome to act, as I said, ended every speech he gave in the Senate with these words: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. So, with mine to Cato, in homage to the great rhetorician that he was, I am going to end this podcast with the following words: Edite fasciculos Epstein. Release the Epstein files.